Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here. Now, it's no secret that governments across the world have been spending absolutely insane amounts of money since the start of the pandemic. But what is more of a secret and is sort of hidden behind the curtains is how the government is getting this money. And it seems that billions and billions of dollars are being created every single month out of thin air. Now, usually the bankers and the politicians who are pulling the strings on this system don't expect you to actually do the research to find out what's truly going on here. They use words that are way too long and overcomplicate things so much that Canadians just can't understand what's going on, and they may like to keep it that way. So in today's video, we're going to break down step by step exactly what's going on, how billions of dollars are being created every single month in this country, and how exactly this is allowing the Canadian government to spend so much money. And make sure to watch this all the way till the end, because we're going to go over how this system is actually making Canada's most wealthy people even more wealthy and keeping the poorest poor. And of course, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for more Canadian content just like this. The first question we have to answer is, how is the government really paying for all of these new benefits? And that's really a question that's asking, how does the government raise money to pay for anything it does? The typical answer would be through taxes, but when it comes to this incredible amount of spending, taxes just aren't going to cut it. So the government turns to something called the Government of Canada bonds. This is essentially like an IOU that the government is writing to whoever buys this bond. They're basically saying, hey, if you give us $100, we'll promise to pay you back that $100 plus a little bit of interest down the road. If more people are interested in buying this Government of Canada bond, then the government doesn't have to offer as high of an interest rate. But if there's less people buying these bonds, they have to increase the interest rate that they're paying on this money that they're essentially borrowing. And who buys these Government of Canada bonds? Well, technically anybody can, but these bonds are bought up in huge quantities by Canada's big banks. Think CIBC, TD, banks like these. But this is where things start to get interesting and where we can learn how money is created from nothing. A new challenger has entered the ring, and their name is the Bank of Canada. And they're not like the other banks. This is a central bank. Their main goal isn't to make boatloads of money, and we can't open accounts there. Instead, their goal is to keep Canada's financial system strong. At the beginning of the pandemic, the Bank of Canada said, hey, I want to buy tons of these Government of Canada bonds. And when I say tons, I mean tons. Since the beginning of the pandemic, they spent anywhere between $4 and $5 billion per week on buying these Government of Canada bonds. But they didn't want to buy these bonds from the government directly. Instead, they decided to buy all of their Government of Canada bonds from the big banks that had already purchased tons of these in the past. We'll get into why they'd even want to buy so many bonds in the first place in just one second, but first we have to go over something that is pretty shocking. When the Bank of Canada buys these government bonds from the other big banks, they say, hey, you know what, we're not going to pay you in money, we're going to pay you in something a little bit different. They pay them with a special type of money that has special rules attached to it that they themselves create out of thin air just by typing a couple of zeros into their computer system. They like to call this new type of money a settlement balance, but for the sake of explanation for the rest of this video, we'll refer to it as special money. And I know this gets a little bit complex, but stay with me and watch all the way till the end, because we're going to go over exactly how this affects every single Canadian without them knowing it. Here's how this special money works. Just like we have an account at a bank, these banks have an account at the Bank of Canada. When the Bank of Canada buys a government bond from one of these banks, they drop a whole bunch of that special money into their account at the Bank of Canada. Think of it as if you were to sell something to your bank. Instead of them giving you the cash to put directly into your pocket, maybe they'd say, hey, you already have an account with us, why don't we just drop the money we owe you in there? But here's the catch. The big banks can't withdraw any of this special money from their account. No, they have to keep it inside of that account. But they can use it to loan out money or borrow money from the other big banks that have accounts with the Bank of Canada. Now, banks lend to and borrow from each other all the time for reasons we won't get into in this video. But now they don't have to use normal money to do this. They can use this special money inside of these Bank of Canada accounts. Because of this, banks have a whole bunch of extra money, or as they like to call it, liquidity. Now, this money amplifies itself and makes its way out into the economy when banks lend money to people or businesses, largely by lending out mortgages to people to buy homes. Homebuyers use these mortgages to buy a house, and the seller of that house gets to keep the money they made from selling. So the special money or settlement balances that the Bank of Canada creates virtually out of thin air makes its way into the economy, increasing the amount of Canadian dollars in the system at any given time by a huge amount. Even though new paper money isn't being physically printed, new money is entering the system entirely digitally. And there's one major concern that everyone has when a whole bunch of new money enters the system. That's inflation. This is what you see when you see those countries where they have to push wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy basic goods because so much money has been added to the system that the money they already had is essentially worthless. Soon we'll find out if this is happening right now in Canada as we speak. But first, we need to go back to the question we asked earlier. Why would the Bank of Canada even want to buy these Government of Canada bonds in the first place? The answer is actually pretty simple. They want to manipulate interest rates for everyone across the country. By buying huge amounts of bonds, they artificially increase how much that bond is worth. And without getting into the details, when this happens, the amount of interest that the government has to pay on that bond goes down. And this interest rate is connected to all of the rest of the interest rates across the country, whether it be a personal line of credit, a car loan, or even a mortgage. The Bank of Canada believes that by lowering interest rates, this will encourage more Canadians to borrow more money and to spend it on things. When they spend it on things, this goes right back into the economy, supporting businesses and, as a result, Canadian jobs. But as an added benefit to the Government of Canada, the interest rate they have to pay out on these bonds goes way down. Remember, this is how the Government of Canada raises all of the money to implement all of the new programs and all of the new spending they're doing. This is how the Government of Canada is able to spend the insane amount of money that they're spending right now on benefits and programs that many Canadians have come to rely on. And remember, this all started when the Bank of Canada decided to buy billions of dollars worth of Government of Canada bonds each and every single week with their special money or settlement balances that they created out of thin air. And this whole process has a name that bankers and politicians like to call it, and that's quantitative easing, or QE. But here's the thing, with all of this new money in the system, we have to talk about the problem we mentioned earlier, inflation. The Bank of Canada says that they're well aware that what they're doing could cause inflation, and that they'll keep their eyes open for any warning signs that this could be happening in Canada. They monitor things and try to keep inflation at a rate of 2% a year, which essentially means that if you have $100 today, exactly 1 year from now, that $100 would buy you what $98 buys you today. The Bank of Canada says that as long as we keep our inflation around this 2% mark, we're actually in a pretty healthy economy, and that's their goal, to keep inflation right around 2%. Throughout the pandemic, inflation has actually been below 2%. So the Bank of Canada is like, hey, I can just keep on doing what I'm doing. Keep this quantitative easing process going. We haven't seen inflation rise above 2%, so we should be fine. But the problem is the data that they're using to come up with this 2% inflation number doesn't actually include the things that some say are actually being inflated. Assets like real estate and stocks. We've seen them shoot up since the beginning of the pandemic. Many people believe that the Bank of Canada's quantitative easing process is a large part of why Canadians have seen such a huge housing boom in a time when you traditionally wouldn't expect that. And this housing boom is creating major social issues, with many young Canadians feeling like it's less and less realistic for them to get into the housing market. So this is where the dilemma really is. Should the Bank of Canada continue just creating this money from nothing? Well, there are pros and cons. Without this money printing, the Government of Canada may not have been able to borrow all of the money they needed in order to implement the important programs like the CERB, the CRB, the wage subsidy, and other business supports. These programs, while being so essential for so many people, cost billions and billions of dollars. Without money being created and added into the system, many Canadians might have fallen into poverty due to a lack of financial support from the government. But many believe that this very same process that has allowed Canadians to receive this support from the government has also stretched the wealth gap between Canada's richest and Canada's poorest. People who own things like stocks and real estate have benefited significantly from this asset inflation caused by the quantitative easing or the special money put into the system. Stocks and real estate have gone to the moon over the past year, while some of Canadians' poorest are still struggling. So you can probably see the dilemma. Without this kind of money creation, many of Canada's most vulnerable wouldn't have received the support they needed. But at the very same time, the bridge that you need to cross in order to go from poor to wealthy is expanding and becoming more and more hard to cross over. And the biggest problem of all is that the very people who are tasked with making decisions for millions and millions and millions of Canadians often don't understand how this system works, even on a basic level. And that's what prompted me to do the research on this topic, to try to at least get a little bit of a better idea of what's actually going on here. As for solutions to the problem, hopefully somebody a whole heck of a lot smarter than me will come up with a way to chart a path forward that's fair and equal for all Canadians and allows everybody to live a better life in the future. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for watching this video. I think it's such an important topic, and likely there's not a whole heck of a lot of people talking about it right now, so I appreciate you. If you haven't already done so, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm going to keep on bringing this Canadian-focused content all the time, so if you want to stay tuned, feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.